different. So I just opened up a new live streaming.
Okay.
Let me give you.
Well, there we are.
You see it?
Yep.
Yep. So we're live. I had to kill the other one. So put a link in the old one so people know where to go, because there's like 4 people waiting in there.
Yeah.
Hey guys, this is Gray Scott, futurist, techno-philosopher. We're just waiting on people to show up on the other end. We had to redo the link. For some reason, the first one didn't work. So we're just waiting on people to come over.
Remove any web address and try again. The chat won't let me do that. Let's see.
Can you not get the link?
I get the link, but I try to post it to the thing and it says, oops, remove any web addresses and try again. So you cannot post web addresses into the link.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get started. Hopefully people can find us on
Notification.
this link. Yeah, all they have to do is go to the channel anyway, so it's fine. So today we're talking about a video that we posted last week called Artificial Imagination. So if you guys have seen that, you can leave comments in our chat so we can talk about artificial imagination. For some reason, my original link wasn't working. I'm not sure what happened. I think it's because we posted it as a scheduled event. It wouldn't let me. For some reason, it wouldn't let me go live on the scheduled event. Anyway, Camillo and I are here. We're talking about last week's episode of Futuristic Now, the artificial imagination episode. And I think we have a couple of comments and questions we wanted to start with.
Yeah, we have people, we have mostly comments of people talking about how interesting it is that possibilities that open up whenever you have tools like Gauguin or other ways of interacting with art that don't require as much skill, but you still manage to put your imagination across.
So basically what you're talking about, so what we're talking about here is a program by NVIDIA that was created called Gauguin. And basically the way it works is you can sketch very crude images. Let's say just a picture of a tree or a picture of a cow or a person, and just stick figures basically.
Right.
And Gauguin will actually use neural network information to pull in and fill in those images.
The details.
The details, yeah. So it's really interesting because for people who can't draw or people who don't have the technical skills to make animations, basically all they have to do is make sketches. And we're talking hyper-realistic images here. That's what we're talking about. So Gauguin will actually fill in using neural network information, high detailed, high resolution imagery that looks photorealistic, which is really remarkable considering the fact that if you can't draw or if you can't paint, you end up with, just by doing a sketch, you end up with these beautiful high resolution images. So this is what neural network, AI, creativity, and artificial imagination, this is what we were talking about before.
Right, this is the beginning of it, and just,
yeah,
letting people access a whole new way of, showing what they want to show about themselves, art, creating, that it's just starting out. Like we were talking about in the video, how it's going to be also Neuralink in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really, for those of you who haven't seen the video, it was last week's episode on my website, or on a YouTube page, called Artificial Imagination. And the idea for the episode, really, when I first started thinking about this, was the idea that AI wasn't just intelligence, that artificial imagination was also going to be a part of this. And that's what we're seeing with procedurally generated video games, for example, where the computers are creating the illustrations and the animations in real time. So as you move from one room or one space to another, let's say you're in a desert scene and you're moving into a tropical scene, the computer itself, the algorithm in the background is procedurally generating that in real time for you. The reason I find this fascinating is because artificial imagination means that we are directly interfacing our imagination with artificial intelligence. So
we actually have a question right now.
Sure.
Irina already came in. She says, awesome videos. I just wondered technically, how is it possible to create neural lakes? Do we know sufficiently about consciousness in order to make that link?
Irina, that's who it's from, Irina? Yeah. Irina, that's a great question. And I think the first thing we have to talk about here is we are just at the edge of quantifying consciousness, meaning that we don't necessarily know the foundation of consciousness, but what we can do is we can quantify perception, and that is a part of consciousness, awareness. So what I mean by this is we can quantify behavioral patterns, we can quantify neural network responses, we can literally see now what is going on in the brain and how people are responding almost in real time. So for example, I think I talked about this in the dream recording episode of Futuristic Now, where we were talking about the University of Kyoto and how this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they had been able to, using an EEG headset strapped to your brain, to a subject's brain, they were able to show, let's say, a black and white image of an X or a black and white image of an O, and they were able to output that onto another computer. So literally what they were being able to do is they were reading the brain waves of the subject, and they were outputting that, what they were seeing, on another computer. So it was pixelated. This was about 6 years ago. And then recently, about a year ago, they released a new report, a new study that was much more complex, so that they were showing pictures of animals. For example, let's say an owl. And so they show a picture of an owl. They've got this advanced, I think if I remember correctly, it was an fMRI is what they were using at the time for the new one. Mm-hmm. And they were able to output in much higher quality a picture of an owl. It was still pixelated, but you could make out the fact that this was an owl. But this was not what was so remarkable about this. What was so remarkable about this, and what was so groundbreaking about this, is that they could remove the image from the subject's vision. They could remove that, and they could say, now I want you to remember what you just saw, and it would still output the image of the owl, which means that we're at the beginning, to answer your question, or to get to your question, Irina, we're getting to a place where we're starting to be able to at least quantify perception, which is just the first stage of understanding consciousness. See, the problem with consciousness is that our baseline for what we understand as human consciousness for a very long time has been a mystery. And the way that we have tried to overcome that mystery is through shows like this, which is, philosophical discussions, art, descriptive poetry. The idea of the creative process was a part of helping fellow humans understand each other's perception and their consciousness, right? So I could say to you, when I look at an apple, I'm looking at a round object that is red. Mm-hmm. And that is just one form of quantifying just one small piece of consciousness. But now we're hooking ourselves up to machines, and we're using artificial intelligence and neural network systems to augment the quantification of perception, the quantification of consciousness. I'm not saying we have discovered and can distinctively say what consciousness is. That is still a question for debate. What I'm saying is that technology is going to help us augment the quantification of that process and what that is. So I can show you now what's inside of my head. You can show me what's inside of your head through this process of EEG fMRI technologies, where and this was the premise for this week's episode, which is artificial imagination. This week's episode was basically, can we get to a place in the future, and this, all the evidence points towards artificial imagination becoming something that's going to be used all the time. And I was saying in the episode that it's not just art, that we're moving towards filmmaking using artificial imagination, where the filmmaker or the illustrator or the animator can actually sit down with some sort of EEG system that's extraordinarily advanced. Granted, this is, we're not talking about 5 years from now. We're talking maybe 25 years from now, where this EEG system that is connected to your brain enables you to bypass the UI that people are using now. So now you sit down with a program. There are lots of geometric things that have to happen within that program for you to create a body that's walking through space in an animated film. In the future, that UI is going to disappear, and we are going to literally imagine and make films. So the AI is the bridge between what comes out of your imagination. The AI is that artificial imagination is the link between the two. Right. So when I said in last week's video that the future is the age of the imagination, I literally mean we will be creating things with just our minds in the future. When I said to people, this was maybe, God, it must have been 8 or 9 years ago, when I said, I had a birthday party, and I said, come to my birthday party and we're going to fly a drone with just the power of our mind, right? And at the time, that EEG, the commercial version of flying a drone with your mind, was really, the public hadn't heard of it. Yeah. So it's still not that popular. It's not that popular, and when you tell people that you can control objects with just the power of your thoughts using an EEG headset, a lot of people still don't know that that's actually a reality. Right. So anyway, so I had people come over, and of course we had a couple of drinks, which is what you do when you're going to fly drones with your brain. So we were flying these don't drink and fly drones, people. That's dangerous. But so anyway, so I had maybe it was 20 people that came over, and after maybe an hour or two, we'd had several drinks, and it was basically it was a sphere. And the drone was inside, so it was protected with a housing inside. And you had an EEG headset that you put on. It had, I think, 4 electrodes, and there was an app on your phone. And so basically, what you were trying to do was you were focusing your mind, and actually, you could see on the app there was sort of a balance. The UI basically was a balance UI where you could you were trying to balance the two together. When the two units would come together on your phone, the drone would take off. And so you can imagine after a couple of drinks, this was much harder for people to do. And so that's what we ended up doing. We ended up flying this drone and hitting the ceiling and breaking a few things, I think, along the way. So anyway, my point is here with talking about that is that now that we know that we can control the real world with the power of our thoughts, this is not magical. This is just, it's basically just a artificial intelligence system working in the background that correlates brainwave energy into a movable actuating part, meaning that you're just causing the drone to take off, right? So we've known that that's going to be possible for quite a while. The thing that I was sort of shocked by was the memory that the fMRI system that the Kyoto University had in place. That actually shocked me, that they could still read the memory of the image after they had removed the original image, that they could use that fMRI system or the EEG headset system to still output that memory. So it's not just that I can understand if you were looking at something because your brain is firing, right, in the visual cortex, your brain is actually firing in that section. If you were reading that energy and putting that on the computer screen, okay, that makes sense to me. But to because we know, memory is such a mysterious thing, and consciousness is still such a mysterious thing, that to be able to tap into the brain and to record and output what you're thinking about,
right,
and your memory, that's fascinating. That was really fascinating. So.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is we don't really need to understand consciousness to start creating user interfaces. Like what you were saying, we already have the EEG.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to get all that complex in order for me to, there's, I forget the main researcher, he actually drilled a hole in his cranium to connect to plug in a USB cord to manage just a pointer. Instead of a mouse, he just moves a mouse with his mind, literally, with his brain.
Yeah, there's a lot of experiments that have gone on where people who are in locked-in situations where they can't use their hands, they can't speak, can use these EEG systems or brain implants to directly communicate and control computers with their minds.
Right.
Which has enabled them to, some people who have never spoken before.
They've been with monkeys.
Well, yeah, that's a whole different subject, but I think what we're circling here is the fact that the communication between the human imagination and the AI, and to be able to control the real world, is we're already past that threshold. We're already there. What this episode and what I'm talking about now is an even more advanced idea, that you're not just using tangible one-to-one correlations, meaning move the cursor to the A.
Right.
What we're talking about is build a Mars base station with dragons and robots.
Right. It's already in my mind.
That's already in my mind. That's hyper realistic and looks exactly the way.
My mind.
Yeah. Let's build Game of Thrones, an episode of Game of Thrones, just by thinking of it.
Right.
And that becomes the film. That's where we're headed. That's why I think artificial imagination is so interesting, because the world of VR, the world of augmented reality, both of those places will need to tap into human imagination in a way that needs to be faster and more efficient than what we're seeing now. So what's happening now is that you have to have that scaffolding built by coders and animators, and most of those overlays, if we're talking about augmented reality, most of those overlays may take months and months to create. Whereas if we get to a place where I think we're headed, the lag time between what you create in your imagination and what is output on the screen or what's output in the virtual world could literally be within a couple of minutes, just depending on how, just depending on how realistic you want that to look. And that's all part of the AI system. So if the parameters are set for artificial imagination systems in the future to be hyper realistic, it may take a little bit longer to render. Right. So then we're just talking about a render. We're not talking about the actual creation part. Usually what takes forever is the creation part, creating 3D models of human beings, their faces, creating the way that their face moves. Like, just if you look at Love, Death, and Robots, the Netflix show, if you haven't seen that, I don't want to spoil it for you. I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but you really should watch that show, especially if you're interested in animation, because it really just blew my mind. There were some really beautiful, hyper-realistic animated episodes where it even left me, knowing what I know about technology, it left me trying to figure out how much of that scene was actually a real face. And I think because I was questioning whether it was a real face was really the true gift of the episode, because it was so realistic that there were a couple of times when the bodies were walking. They still haven't gotten the walk down. Right. For some reason, it's a lot harder. I think it's a lot easier to manipulate the face and to animate a human face to look absolutely real than it is there's something about the motion of people walking. And everybody has a very distinct way that they walk, right? So if that there was one episode where I forget the actress's name, but she's I think she's on Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
She was in the
Lucky 13, actually.
It was Lucky 13, yeah. So there's an episode
yeah.
called Lucky 13 where that was her episode. Because I have seen her walk in real life,
Right.
in my mind, there was a tickle. There was like a trigger that was like, that's not real. Because you've seen her. And see, that's another thing we have to talk about is this continuity of belief, right? So when you've already seen a real person in many different forms and many different real films,
Mm-hmm.
when you start to see them animated, it has to be exactly like them. Otherwise, you're never going to trick the audience. So we might end up seeing new animated celebrities that never existed in the real world, only because our minds need to be tricked into believing that this person has these traits built into them. So for example, we talked about earlier today, we talked about Scarlett Johansson. Because most of the world has seen Scarlett Johansson, we've seen her walk, we've seen her on the red carpet, we've seen how her body moves and how her face moves. If it's not convincing enough, then there will always be that disconnect that you always believe that you're watching an animation instead of just falling into the movie. So there were a couple of times in Love, Death, and Robots where I got pulled out of it because whenever I saw her walk, it sort of pulled me out of it. But otherwise, the other parts where I was just seeing her face and she was in the spaceship, I had no problem with it. I got sucked into, I forgot that I was watching this animation, basically. Right. And I think that's where we're headed with this artificial imagination. Is we're headed towards a world where the average person, not just the experienced artist, or not just the person that has this super expensive equipment, but the average person can create unbelievable films just by the power of their imagination. I think that's where we're headed for sure.
Imagination alone. Yeah, you were talking about the rendering process takes long, whatnot. That's, it's still, the technology is still advancing. Just the power of the processing power is just insane. So that's going to be the easy part in some terms.
Well, and when that stuff goes onto the cloud and when it's distributed, mm-hmm. right? When the processing power is distributed onto multiple servers across the world, basically. Yeah. That rendering time will be much lower. But here's the other thing quickly. The other part that people have to think about is we're also assuming that if we create these digital three-dimensional illustrations and animations, that we have to recreate them every time. Mm-hmm. But in fact, what I'm saying here is that, so for example, if I create a version of New York City for a scene, like I'm thinking, I want a scene of New York City, we're flying over the city. That has already been created in the three-dimensional space by someone else already, probably, right? So what I'm talking about is not proprietary artificial imagination. I'm talking about the collective artificial imagination, meaning that if the computer knows that I'm imagining New York City, it can pull all of that three-dimensional data in an instant in the background, and the city starts to be created because it's already probably been created before. You don't have to recreate the city over and over again. So a lot of that geometry can be stored and can be distributed across this artificial imagination landscape. And I think that's what's going to happen with augmented reality. I think once the developers start to realize that a lot of these assets are already created, that they can start collectively start to use those. You already see it with a lot of developers are putting out packs, right? So there's the New York City pack, and these three-dimensional landscapes for filmmakers to use themselves. So that is sort of the precursor for what I'm saying here. That instead of downloading a pack that you have to alter and put cameras around, that the AI is doing that for you in the background. Sometimes when we're talking about this, we're not actually thinking those kinds of specifics until we get into it. But for some of you who are watching, it's, the way to compare this, I don't know, did you play No Man's Sky? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, I haven't played it, but yes.
There was a lot of hype around that video game where people were, the game itself was procedurally generated. So there was an algorithm running in the background. So no matter what world you went to, it was a new world and was also created procedurally. So it didn't have to be stored. It could be created as you arrived.
Yeah, it was an infinite game.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that technology is what we're talking about in the artificial imagination future. When we talk about VR in that space, that's where it gets interesting to me. So you have the creative part of it, making films, making art, that sort of thing. But you also have informational architecture, meaning that when you create a concept, when you create a new piece of work, that could also be shared and distributed all throughout the system. This has a lot to do with Creative Commons and sort of the open idea of sharing creativity. So you have websites like Unsplash who provide people with images to use, photography to use, and that can be used commercially, it can be used on your blog, it can, all of that. But I think what we're going to see is a Creative Commons for the animation world too, where you can just pull down in the background. The AI will just pull those things down for you and create on the fly. So when we talk about rendering, we also have to factor in the fact that some of those assets will already be created.
Right, and I was thinking about what you mentioned about the rendering part of the processing power. Like a week ago, I think it was that Google came out with Stadia, the video game platform that they're working on.
Yeah,
No consoles, and it has it has more processing power than the other two fastest consoles in the market put together right now. And that's just online streaming. That's the thing. You don't need your computer to be a 8-core, super monster to process this. It's on the cloud now, and it's still going to render 4K, and it's still going to be fast. It's going to be insane. So that's what we're going.
What we're talking about, what you're touching on, is decentralization of processing power, which is really blockchain. I mean, at a certain level, we're going to use blockchain to. I think let's put it this way. I think the scaffolding for augmented reality, especially if we want to protect our privacy. I mean, we can sort of go into privacy really quick because we talked about that today. A lot of people have said, well, once you penetrate the brain imagination space, right? Once computers have access to our imagination, once computers have access to our brains, then what about privacy?
Right.
How do you keep your thoughts and your inspiration and your imagination private? Well, first of all, I'm assuming that the way this will work is that the hardware is an elective thing. So in other words, it's something you put on, it's not something you drill in. So there's a difference between drilling the technology in and putting it on. If the technology is implanted, then we have to have privacy in our culture worked out way before we start drilling into people's brains. I mean, first of all, you guys can do it. I'm not until we're ready. I'm not actually ready for drilling into the brain until you guys figure out how not to be, how to deal with privacy.
How the limits are going to be. I mean, it creates a plethora of issues.
So getting back to the blockchain idea, I think if you use, part of what this is about is overcoming. This is a very complicated topic. It seems like every topic we go into, it's so multifaceted. You can't just say, hey, we're going to use computers and AI to create wonderful worlds. That is it's a very, the silo, that is one silo, but it's connected to all of the others. You can't have AI diving into your unconscious mind if you don't have privacy worked out. I mean, you can, but then we'll just end up living in a dictatorship, and we'll be living in 1984. So part of what I think is going to happen is that the scaffolding for this needs to be built on blockchain, because then everyone, for distributed processing power and for security. So knowing that I can share access from an AI into my mind, enabling, and that may just be because I'm creating a video or a movie or a painting, giving that AI the access to my imagination, we have to be very, very certain that there's nothing else going on there.
No malware.
We don't want malware
in our minds.
In our minds,
it's already embedded in there.
We do not want malware in our minds. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, there's too many possibilities there on where that could go.
Yeah.
But it's still just what we have now. It's pretty mind blowing. Like, honestly, going back a little bit to the Gauguin thing, it's like, it will make a lot of people just express them. Like, it's a whole new age of expression, and this is, you know, like the new generations are really the ones who are going to benefit from this, and they're going to be pretty much brought up into this. Like,
their paradigm of you know, it's weird because when I saw Gauguin, when I saw the program from NVIDIA, I mean, as miraculous as that program is, when I saw it, and if you guys don't know this, you should actually you should Google it. I don't think we can add a link in there to the chat. If we can, Camilla's going to add a link so you guys can see what we're talking about. But the Gauguin program from NVIDIA, again, I find it miraculous that it can do that, but it just makes sense because there's already so many images on the internet. We just need to coalesce those images and enable someone to draw a very crude image of a landscape, and the neural network would just go out and search for those images and put them into the drawing. And we're talking about the final product is a very hyper-realistic looking drawing. The other thing I thought was interesting about this program, the Gauguin program, is that if you tell the program that you want snow on the ground, it will change the sky without you doing anything. It will change the sky to match a winter scene because it knows the color of the sky in the winter is a different color. So you can see, for those of you watching, you can see very quickly just how advanced this thing is going to become. It's not just about flat two-dimensional pictures. It's about the temperature of the sky being altered. And that's being done through the AI, realizing that you're trying to create a winter image or a winter landscape. It's miraculous. I mean, I'm not shocked by this anymore because for being a futurist, I know a lot of the emerging technologies that are coming are even more mind-blowing than this. But often I have to wait until there's proof.
Proof of concept is working.
You have to have proof of concept. Sometimes not just because you're trying to prove what you're saying is going to come true, but the proof of concept just so you can illustrate to people what this is going to look like. If I would have said to you even a year ago, there's going to be this program where you can do a pencil sketch and an AI is going to hyper-realistically create an image for you in real time that looks like a photograph just because you sketched some lines on a piece of paper. It's hard for people first to believe it, but it's also hard for people to envision something that works that way.
So fast, because you told me this a year ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, maybe 5 years from now. You told me it's like, no, it's gonna be in a year.
We were look, I think it was the
seven is what's really astounding.
Well, and that's why a lot of futurists have said that they have been too conservative with their predictions. That when we were saying that these things were going to happen in 25 or 30 years, that in fact, there's an explosion happening and it's actually coming faster and faster. Hey, Smidge, and get my dog. Say hello. Anyway, so this is just one small piece of what this channel is about and one small piece of what this show is about and what my message is. is that we are entering a future that is so chaotic and so complex that only by staring directly into the face of the future are we going to be able to survive that. Otherwise, if we keep ignoring these technologies, and it's going to overtake us in a way that I don't think people are even, again, this goes back to having someone say to you, we are headed towards a singularity of simulation. That's what I've been talking about recently, is the idea that it's not just a singularity, it's a singularity of simulation. We're moving towards a space where reality is going to be simulated so much faster than we ever thought possible. This is being brought on by the digital twin technologies that's going on, and the industrial digital twin. This is being brought on by virtual reality and AR, all of that, all of those things. That on top of the fact that we run simulations all the time anyway, specifically military simulations, medical simulations, all of those things. So the digital simulation that is coming, the singularity simulation that is coming, is going to happen so fast. My fear is that people are going to be caught off guard, that they're not going to be psychologically ready. Mm-hmm. And you see it everywhere. You know, you say to someone, so for example, any commercial that you watch right now, 95% of those commercials were never real. And I'm talking about waterfalls and horses pulling beer carts and, like, you know what I mean? I mean, those assets, those digital simulated assets, even though in the back of your mind, you're being tricked to believe that you're looking at a real object, they never existed.
Right.
They only existed in the imagination. And that's why I'm saying that artificial imagination, that is a piece of artificial imagination. Artificial imagination really is all of the things that we create that never existed in the real world. And it's an amazing and fascinating thing. Tim's saying something there.
Tim says, powerful tool for non-artists to create quick, powerful visuals. This was when we were talking about Gauguin. Yeah, so Tim, you're right. And that's what I was saying earlier about Gauguin, is for people who, let me say it this way. There's something to be said for people who have the ability to create what they see in their mind. And this is the most frustrating thing for every artist, is trying to correlate what you're seeing in your imagination to the product that you create. Yeah. It's very difficult for an artist to fully manifest exactly what they're seeing in the real world. I think that happens very rarely. And I think and that's for people who are extraordinarily talented, right? But imagine all of the people that still have vivid imaginations and that have something to contribute to that imaginative future, that don't have any sort of artistic skill. Now we're talking about adding millions and millions of imaginations into the system that never had the ability to express themselves that way. So I think hidden out there are some solutions to a lot of our problems, just because those imaginations will have the tools to create and to show us. Yeah. So Tim says he doesn't have that commitment. Well, you know what's funny, Tim? I used to draw and paint when I was younger, and I got to a place. It started out as sketching, and then it moved from sketching to oil paint. And so I got really good at being able to see something in my mind and put that down on canvas. And I remember I've talked about this before I think I wrote an article in the Futurist magazine where I talked about visualizing the future. And when I was younger, my mom signed me up for painting classes with this older woman. She was an artist, and she only took on, I think, 5 or 6 students at a time. And
I remember the first time, the first class that we took together, she, it was like 5 or 6 of us, and I think most of us were like 10 to 15 years old. That was the range of the students that she had. And we had our oils there, we had our canvas in front of us, and she wanted us to paint a picture of a stream running through a field with trees and whatever. And I remember before we got started, she said, before you pick up your brush, before you even start, I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to visualize in your mind. And nobody had ever talked to me about third eye or visualization. I mean, this was just not talked about in my community living in the South. And I remember her saying, I want you to imagine the stream and the grass and the trees. And now I want you to move the sun across the sky. And I want you to see how that changes the reflections in the water. I want you to see in your mind how that changes the shadows on the leaves. Now I want you to turn it from winter to fall to spring to summer. And so, and we're all doing this. And some of these kids, especially me, I think for the very first time, this was the very first time anyone had said to me, show me that internal landscape that you have, the internal world that was sort of dying to get out into the world. Right. This was the first time that someone had actually tapped into that, shown me how to tap into it. So anyway, we finished visualizing and we all started to paint. And of course, all the paintings were slightly different because one person is doing fall, one person is doing winter or whatever. But I remember that painting. I don't know where it is now, but it was the first time that I understood how to get that vision out that lives in your unconscious, that internal landscape, the mind. It was the first time I was able to actually put that down on canvas in a way that it wasn't exact, because I still didn't have the skills. But yeah, there was still a technical division there, but it was the first time that I actually was able to put that out there. And what I'm saying is that artificial imagination and the artificial intelligence is going to enable people to do that in ways that we've never even imagined, with depth and with realism in ways that we've never imagined. So you look at the movie Avatar, right? James Cameron's Avatar. I mean, when you think of, did James Cameron, when he saw that in his mind, he has hundreds and hundreds of animators to make his vision come true. Right. What I'm saying is that artificial imagination is going to flatten that playing field where the average person can become the next James Cameron.
Create their own avatars, just thinking about them.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing.
So he's talking about the death of photography. What was he saying?
A photographer friend, YouTuber Peter McKinnon, saw this and asked if it's the death of the photographer.
That's interesting. Well, okay, let's put it this way. I know what you're asking. I know what he's asking. I spoke at the Savannah School of Art because I used to be a photographer. I spoke at the Savannah School of Art, the visual arts college there. And I was saying at the time, and of course I was saying this to the photographers, I was saying at the time that photography is the new painting. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, there were a couple of painters there that were really offended, and they were saying, well, how can you say that this is the new painting? That photography is the new painting.
Right.
But what I was trying to get across is that by the time you paint one image, a photographer can capture hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of images. And what I'm saying is that I don't know if it's the death of photography. I think there will always be people who are interested in photography, just like there are people who are interested in record players and all of that. I mean, some of that becomes vintage, some of that becomes nostalgia. But what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily that it kills photography. I think what it does is it gives photographers the ability to create scenes that they've never been able to create before. First of all, because as a photographer, any photographer watching this knows it takes an enormous budget to make a beautiful landscape picture. If we're talking about a set, design, clothing, all that, it takes an enormous budget to make that happen. But if you're doing that with your mind, if you're able to create these images with your mind, yes, your medium moves from photography into animation or filmmaking even. I don't know if it kills it. I think it augments it. I think it moves it from one medium just to the other medium.
You just take photography and then the post is going to be all in your mind. Which would be, exactly.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
it's a tool.
Yeah. So Tim, to answer your question, that's really, I think it's just augmenting the medium. I think, creative people typically don't have just one life. They usually create multiple different versions of their image. Some people take their photography and they paint on top of it. Some people take their paintings and they try to recreate that and make films out of it. Some films are inspired by paintings. So I think there's multiple layers to this in the future where you see different people creating for different reasons in different ways. Just adding more to the content. So at 45 minutes and 58 seconds, I think we're going to wrap this episode up. So thanks for watching. If you guys haven't checked out my channel, or if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel. And be sure to go over and watch the artificial imagination video that was just posted. I think we posted it on last Wednesday. Yep. So anyway, that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good day. And let me know in the comments what you think about this episode and what you think about artificial imagination and our future. And that's it. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.